Welcome, welcome. I'm so excited to be with you here today because this is such an extraordinary topic. The information we're going to cover today is so vitally important. I'm researching it for a while now. I'm just so excited to share it with you today. And secondly is because this is the first time we are opening up these lectures to the public. The reason for that is because the information is so important, and we felt that really the more people who know about this, the better. So welcome. So what we're going to do is I'm first going to talk about gut health and the microbiome. And so gut health, mastering your microbiome. In order for us to really talk about the microbiome, we have to understand what it is. What is it? Because it's a term that has been thrown around quite a lot lately. And I just want everyone to have a clear understanding of what we're actually talking about. So we think of ourselves as these big, strong humans, these autonomous beings, you know, that are like the masters of our domain, very highly of ourselves. But the truth is that we are covered from the top of our head to the tips of our toes in these invisible microbes. Now I want you just to hold out your thumb, really examine your thumb, your beautiful thumb, look at it. You have 60 million microbes roaming around your thumb right now. Know that. You have 100 trillion microbes on and in your body. That is 10 times more than human cells in your body. So what are those microbes? Well, there are many different types, and you've probably heard of a lot of them. So we have bacteria. There are 20 to 30,000 different species of bacteria in your body. And within each species, you have several different strains. So actually, there's a lot more. We have parasites, and there are about 300,000 different parasites. And we've been led to believe that all parasites are bad, but actually that's not the case. So for instance, you got this little parasite that lives under your eyelid. It kind of looks like a worm with a freaky face, and it's absolutely essential for your health. If you don't have this little guy, you are much more prone to disease, okay? Then you have fungi or yeast, and there are about 5 million different species of fungi. We have something called Archaea. Now, Archaea are these single-celled organisms that have been around for like forever. They've been around on planet Earth for 4 billion years. We've only had oxygen for 2.5 billion years. So they've survived for 1.5 billion years without even oxygen. And you will find them on the bottom of the oceans, you will find them in volcanoes, and you will find them in your gut. Very cool little creatures. We are vastly outnumbered. We are one species, Homo sapiens, vastly outnumbered. And collectively, the genetic material of all these microbes is 150 times that of the human genome. So I hate to break it to you guys, but you are literally more microbe than human. Okay? Now, this information is absolutely revolutionary. We didn't know this a few years ago. This is research that has come out in the last 10 years. This is as revolutionary as when Galileo discovered that the Earth was not the center of the universe. You know, before we thought the Earth was the center, everything revolved around the Earth. And when he said, no, that's not the case, they ridiculed him, they wanted to execute him. Why? Because it went against everything that the establishment believed, everything that the governments and religions and everything believed. What I'm saying is that this is just as revolutionary, because what we are discovering is that human health does not start in the human cell. So everything we thought we knew about health and disease, we now realize that we were wrong. Okay? Revolutionary. And that's what we're going to delve into today. Okay? So, these microbes, they're not just there. They're not just there along for the ride. We have co-evolved with these microbes. We are part of a symbiotic relationship with them. It's like we are an ecosystem with them. And this ecosystem is very similar to an ecosystem in like the Amazon rainforest or the Great Barrier Reef or the African savanna. Life thrives on diversity, and you have that harmony and balance. So all creatures are interconnected with each other in some way. So if we look at the Great Barrier Reef, you might decide, well, I don't like sharks. Let's take out the sharks. And you might think, well, that's a great idea. But if we were to do that, of course, the whole ecosystem becomes unstable, because the sharks are there for a reason. They have evolved with the whole ecosystem to be part of it. And with us, it's very similar. We have this ecosystem, this complex diversity of species that we have co-evolved with in this symbiotic relationship. And what's happened is that over time, we have grown to trust these microbes. And we started outsourcing some of the most important functions of our body, of our physiology, to these microbes. So for instance, we have outsourced things to do with digestion, to do with immune system balance, metabolism, hormones, even brain function, to do with mood, cognition, memory. And to give you one example, in every cell of your body, you have something called mitochondria. Do you remember this from biology class? You do? Oh my gosh! Oh, that's wonderful. So then you will remember perhaps also that the mitochondria produce all the energy in your body. They produce the ATP. And you have many, hundreds of mitochondria in each cell. If they were to stop producing energy, you would die within 3 seconds. Okay? So they are absolutely fundamental to us staying alive. Well, it turns out that these mitochondria are ancient bacteria. So we basically invited them into our cells and said, hey, can you produce all the energy for us? And they said, like, no problem. Okay? They're bacteria. This is the future of medicine. This is the real deal. It is changing how we approach everything to do with our health and well-being. Revolutionary. So human health, we know now, does not start in the human cell. Now, part of the problem is that we have waged war on these microbes. We have been taught that these microbes, these bacteria, are bad, and hence we have waged war on them. And it's almost to the extent where we believe that the more sterile our environment, the better it is for our health. Now, if we go to any ecosystem, a coral reef or the jungle, we find that no one's fighting anyone. There is this natural relationship, this balance between all the species. And yes, some species are eating other species, and there's a hierarchy of the food chain. Yes, but not to anyone's extinction. There's always this balance that biology has figured out over billions of years. Each species has a sense of integrity, respect for all the other species in the ecosystem. But of course, the way we approach microbes is completely different. We are trying to completely annihilate them. We have waged this big war on them, trying to nuke them. We're trying to wipe them out completely, right? So it's a completely way of approaching our own ecosystem. And the way we're doing this, of course, is we're trying to nuke them with antibiotics, with harsh disinfectants, with chemical cleaning materials, herbicides, pesticides, sanitizers, all of these things that we have been told are really good for us. But the truth of the matter is that all of these things disrupt our microbiome and has enormous negative consequences for our health and our well-being. Now we have found that when we disrupt our microbiome through scientific research, we have shown that this is the leading cause of all allergies, your autoimmune diseases, metabolic disorders, so all your metabolic disorders, that is your diabetes, heart disease, cancers. These, of course, are affecting our society more and more. Yeah? The thing is that we can no longer think of ourselves as just a standalone. We can't think of ourselves as just this ecosystem, because we survive in this sea of microbes. They're all around us. So in our air, we have 10 to the 31 microbes. That is 10 with 31 zeros after it, just in the air that we breathe. In our sea, in our oceans, we have 10 to the 31 microbes. In our soils, it's 10 to the 30 microbes. They are everywhere. We cannot escape from them. And to give you an idea of how many microbes are surrounding us, think of all the stars in our universe. Not our galaxy, our universe. And then multiply that by 100 million. That's how many microbes we have around. Okay, so you can't escape them. Right, so the point is they are everywhere. Now, in our body, our microbes are concentrated in our gut. And actually, 70% of the stool that you pass every single day is bacteria, okay? Which I find absolutely fascinating. Anyway, what I want to do now is just give you a bit of appreciation of what these bacteria actually do for you and how involved they are in your health. And we're going to start with the brain. So it turns out that your gut, your bacteria, are an integral part of your brain. And now scientists are actually calling our gut the second brain. Why? Because your gut and your brain are in constant communication. Your brain is communicating with the gut and the bacteria in there, and your bacteria are communicating with your brain. It's happening all the time. And it does this through different ways. So one way it does this is through the vagus nerve. This is one of the biggest nerves in your body, and you can think of it as a giant internet cable that connects your brain and your gut. Now, if you were to take your gut and spread it flat, it would cover the surface of 2 tennis courts. Now compare that with if you take your skin and put it flat, it would be about 1.5 meters squared. But your gut, 2 tennis courts. And why is this important? Well, in the lining of the gut, you have all these nerve cells, 500 million nerve cells. That's constantly gathering information from all these bacteria, everything that's happening in your gut. Every nanosecond, it is sending that information up the vagus nerve to your brain, so your brain knows what's going on with all these bacteria, everything that's happening in your gut. Absolutely phenomenal. So there's that constant communication there through that giant internet cable that you can think of it. Secondly, they communicate with chemicals. Now, I'm sure you've heard of neurotransmitters, these brain chemicals. Probably the most famous one, serotonin. You've heard of serotonin, our happy chemical. So this is, it helps us with our mood, concentration, focus, even with energy. And it's the chemical, the neurotransmitter, we target through our antidepressants like Zoloft and Prozac. We're targeting serotonin. Now this super important brain chemical that's so vital for our well-being and feeling good and happy, well, it turns out 90% of it produced by your gut bacteria. Oh my goodness, 90%! Not in your brain, in your gut. If we look at dopamine, this is another neurotransmitter. It's usually thought of as a reward chemical. It's also the chemical which gives you drive when you want to get up in the morning and accomplish something. That's dopamine that gets you out of bed. Or why we're so addicted to our phones, because every time your phone, you see something flash on the screen or it pings and you look at it and click, you get a hit of dopamine. So that's that reward. So dopamine, 50% is produced by these gut bacteria. Only half is produced in your brain. And when we continue to look at these neurotransmitters, we find that over 30 of them are actually produced in your gut. Then we thought before, you know, that, oh, the bacteria, they break down the food in the gut. They break down the fiber. But what we've now learned is that they don't just chop the food up or chop the fiber up. They actually transform it into these short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs. And these short-chain fatty acids, they can cross the blood-brain barrier. So the blood-brain barrier is there to protect the brain, to make sure that nothing goes into the brain that shouldn't be there. But these short-chain fatty acids, they have access. They can go in. And in the brain, they affect focus, they affect your mood, they protect you from Alzheimer's disease, and they even repair the blood-brain barrier. So your gut bacteria produce them, and then they go up to the brain and help the brain out. Okay? The bottom line is, really, your gut and your brain are communicating all the time. It is happening right now. Absolutely fascinating. Let's look at depression. So studies have shown that you can alter anxiety and depression with diet alone. And the mechanism through which it works is the microbiome. So there was a study that was concluded in 2020 where they showed that the gut microbiome is the driving force behind clinical depression. The gut microbiome, driving force behind clinical depression. So what they found is that in people who are clinically depressed, they have a completely different microbiome compared to someone who is not. And the microbiome of someone who is clinically depressed, what they found was that it favored a pattern of microbes that what we term inflammatory, or we can label them as bad. And they didn't have a lot of the microbes that produce these short-chain fatty acids. So we're seeing a real difference in the microbiome between someone who's depressed and someone who's not. If you want to optimize your brain health, then you need a healthy gut. But it's not just the gut affecting the brain. The brain also affects the gut. So for instance, if you have been under a lot of stress, psychological stress, your brain releases various stress hormones, such as CRF, and this affects your gut microbiome, causes dysbiosis, which basically just means that you have damaged your gut microbiome. So stress in and of itself, psychological stress, can damage your gut microbiome, causing dysbiosis. I want you to bring your attention to a study that I also found quite fascinating that I wanted to share with you. And that was, they looked at women who had urinary tract infections, and they went to the doctor, and they got a course of antibiotics. And what they found was that in these women, for the next 12 months, they were 24% more at risk of getting clinically depressed, diagnosed with clinical depression. Now, if these same women went back to the doctor's office, maybe for something completely different, maybe they had bronchitis or something, and they got a second course of antibiotics, then within the next 12 months, they had now increased their risk to be diagnosed with clinical depression to 54%. 2 courses of antibiotics. They did a similar study with regards to anxiety and panic attacks, and they found with 1 course of antibiotics, your risk for clinical depression goes up 17% within a 12-month period, and if you had 2 courses of antibiotics, it would go up by 44%. So, the gut is critically important for our mental health. Let's move on and talk a little bit about the immune system. So the gut, if you think of it, is really just a tube that goes through your nasal cavity and your mouth all the way down and out, right? It's just like a hole. So really, the inside of this tube is technically still outside your body. Can you picture that? Yeah? So you have your microbiome concentrated in your gut, technically outside your body. And then separating your gut from the rest of the body is this very, very thin epithelial layer. And it is just one cell thick. So it's just cells lined up, and they're held together by these protein linkages, right? But very, very thin epithelial layer. So you have on one side 39 trillion microbes, and then on the other side of this very, very thin layer, you have 70% of your immune system. Okay? Now, even though they are physically separated by a very, very thin barrier, they are constantly communicating with each other. And your bacteria ensure that your immune system is effectively fighting off any pathogens, but not so violently so that there's collateral damage, so that it fights and damages your own body, right? So there is a balance there. And if you damage your gut, you disrupt this communication between the bacteria and the immune system. So once again, if you want a healthy immune system, you need a healthy gut. Gut bacteria, they don't just fight off pathogens in this area, but they also fight off infections in your lungs and elsewhere in the body, like influenza and flu. And they do this because the gut bacteria can order the immune system to produce these specialized, potent antiviral proteins that would effectively eliminate such a viral inflammation. But if you lack these beneficial bacteria, then you will not have a strong, well-functioning immune system. I mentioned in the beginning that we have waged war on these microbes. Our microbiome are constantly under attack. Through processed foods, through environmental toxins, through antibiotics, through chemicals in our food, through herbicides, and so on. So to give an example, one of the most widely used herbicides in the world, it's called glyphosate. It's sold as Roundup. They do use it in Zambia. And it was actually patented as an antibiotic, but it's being used as a herbicide. Now, in the world, collectively, we spray 4.5 billion pounds of this one chemical. In the US, it is so bad now that they reckon 70% of our air, or their air, has this glyphosate in it. And of course, that evaporates up and then it rains down, so 70% of the rain has this antibiotic herbicide in it, wiping out our microbiome. All of this is damaging our gut microbiome. And when we talk about dysbiosis or gut microbiome, what we're talking about, what actually happens is that you get a low diversity of microbes. And this is not good. Because the reason for that is because each microbe has a role to play. It has a specific thing that it does. So if you are healthy and you have a diverse microbiome, and for whatever reason you lose one of the bacterial species, it's not such a big deal because there will probably be another species that can step in and carry out that function. But if you lose diversity, then suddenly you don't have that flexibility, right? So there's no one who can step in and carry on that function. So damaged microbiome, you get low diversity and you get these gaps in the type of microbes. Also what happens is that you then get these bad microbes, I'll say bad, that start taking over, start taking up more space. they're not essentially bad. It's just that you have lost balance. It's just like the sharks. They serve a purpose there, okay? But it's just you've lost balance. And, you know, we've been taught some are bad, some are good, and yes, but there's so much more to the story, and there's a lovely study that demonstrates this, where they studied a specific bacteria in the gut, and they found this bacteria was just going on with its life, doing whatever it was supposed to do. You know, the pH was nice, and the temperature in the body was good, it was happy. And then what happened? They injected the person with opiates, so painkillers. And they observed what happened with this one bacteria. And suddenly this bacteria started getting aggressive, started attacking the gut lining. So it's when we start messing with our microbiome, it's when we start attacking it, and that's when we get problems. That's when we get dysbiosis. And when we have dysbiosis, it leads to leaky gut. Remember I said you have that thin epithelial layer with all the cells, single cells? Well, leaky gut, it means those linkages start breaking up, and these cells, they kind of drift apart a little bit, and things that from your gut can now escape through these passages and leak into the body. That's leaky gut. And that's a problem, because that's a barrier, right? It's supposed to keep certain things out and certain things in, and now you no longer have that barrier. And dysbiosis has directly been linked to all our allergies, to all our autoimmune illnesses, as well as virtually every chronic illness. We can link it back to dysbiosis, damage of our microbiome. Why? Well, one of the reasons is because when you have leaky gut, these what we call bacterial endotoxins can leak from the gut and into the body. Bacterial endotoxins leak into the body from our gut. You can think of these bacterial endotoxins as pure inflammation. So you can imagine if you have this leaking into your gut continuously over time, then this is going to lead to problems. And we have shown categorically that every chronic illness out there can be linked back to inflammation. So low-grade chronic inflammation will lead to diabetes, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all these chronic illnesses that we see. And we can now tie it back to the gut and the gut microbiome. Sometimes what happens is that you get a huge amount of these bacterial endotoxins coming through that gut barrier all at once. And this then completely overwhelms the immune system, and the immune system overactivates. And what happens then is that the immune system is now out of balance, and it struggles to know what is friend, what is foe, what is foreign, what is you. And the immune system can become your enemy, and that's when you get allergies. That's when you get autoimmune illnesses. So, want a healthy immune system that is in balance and works as it should, you need a healthy gut. I want to take a little time and look at, well, where does this microbiome actually come from? And if we imagine ourselves in our mother's womb, not sterile, but we are as sterile as we will ever get, if you think of it like that. And when we have a natural vaginal birth and we pass through that birth canal, our mother donates her microbiome to us. But the thing is that the microbiome in the vagina is very different to the microbiome in the gut. But nature has solved this problem beautifully, because at 36 weeks of pregnancy, the gut microbiome of the mother, the pregnant lady, of the vagina starts changing to resembling that of the gut. So then when the birth comes and the baby passes through the birth canal and the mother donates the microbiome, it is resembling that of her gut. Absolutely incredible. And to further emphasize how important the microbiome is for us, we can just look at human breast milk. So nobody would argue that human breast milk is the perfect food for babies. Absolutely. And it contains something called HMO, human milk oligosaccharides. And this is the third most prominent ingredient in breast milk after fat and carbohydrate. Now, when you look at this HMO, you see that actually it has 0 nutritional content. And you would think, for something that's the third prominent ingredient in breast milk, why on earth is it there if it's not feeding the baby? Surely we want to feed the baby, right, and make the baby grow. But it turns out that HMO feeds the good bacteria. And of course, that is vitally important. So with the breast milk, we're feeding the good bacteria, which is so important, as we've already discovered, for the baby's immune system, but also mental, cognitive, brain health. And we find that babies who were born through C-section, who were maybe bottle-fed, who perhaps were exposed to antibiotics early in life, they are at much greater risk of developing diseases like type 1 diabetes, Crohn's, and allergies. And we see this. I mean, if we look like 40 years ago, there were hardly any kids who had food allergies. And now it's like 1 in 3 kids have food allergies or suffer from some kind of allergy, right? And it's because we're destroying our microbiome. Also, if we look at some of the stats, we see that in the West now, your average 10-year-old has had 10 courses of antibiotics by the time they are 10. Also, we find that pregnant mothers, 50% of pregnant mothers have taken a course of antibiotics during their pregnancy. Anyway, moving on. If we want a healthy microbiome, what can we do? Well, we gotta feed them. We really have to feed these microbes. And what do these microbes like? Well, they love fiber. And, you know, fiber is this like forgotten superfood. We're always talking about, did you get your protein? How much protein compared to fat and carbohydrates are you eating? You know, nobody asks you, did you get your fiber today? And it turns out that fiber is actually more important than anything when it comes to our health. So fiber is the microbiome's favorite superfood. And when we feed them, they reward us. And they reward us by producing these short-chain fatty acids. And there are 3 main types. You have acetate, propionate, and butyrate. You might have heard of them. So these short-chain fatty acids are so beneficial. They are highly anti-inflammatory. And I'll just give you a few examples of what they can do for you. They help to optimize your immune system. They help reverse leaky gut, because it turns out that it is the preferred food source for the cells lining your gut. They help reverse insulin resistance, so absolutely essential if someone is struggling from diabetes or blood sugar problems. Also, absolutely amazing for brain health. We touched on that a little bit before. So for mood, memory, also for disorders like autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. There's been a lot of research around butyrate and its anti-inflammatory properties, and it's actually being used to treat inflammatory bowel disease, such as ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, and also for the prevention and treatment of cancer, colon cancer in particular. They've done a lot of studies on that, where they've shown that high-fiber diets reduce the risk of colon cancer, and it's because of the short-chain fatty acids. So for instance, there was a study they did on mice, where they gave mice a high-fiber diet, and they found that in the mice who had the microbes that produced butyrate, there was 75% less tumors in those mice compared to the mice who were still fed a high-fiber diet but did not have the microbes that could produce butyrate. Also, if you're trying to lose weight, then short-chain fatty acids are amazing because they help regulate fat metabolism, they increase fat burning, and they decrease fat storage. So it turns out that people who are obese, their microbiome is completely different to someone who is lean. So we know, okay, if someone's obese, they're probably going to have this mix of bacteria, and someone who's lean, they're going to have a slightly different mix of bacteria. So what they did, some researchers, is that they took twins, identical twins, who are identical on a genetic level, but one was obese and one was lean. And they took the microbiome from these twins and put it in mice. And then they fed the mice exactly the same diet. And what happened? The mouse that got the microbiome from the lean individual stayed lean, and the mice that got the microbiome from the obese individual became obese. And this happened really quickly. Absolutely fascinating. And they're doing studies in humans now with this as well. So this is called FMT, Fecal Microbiota Transplant. And it's very simple. It's basically you're transplanting your poop, yeah? So they do this through enemas. So they harvest your microbiome, your poop, in someone who is perhaps in a diseased state, in a healthy state, and they put that into someone who is diseased to see what will happen. You can also get it through frozen poop capsules. Oh, yes. In America, they call them crapsules. Anyway, if we look at something called Clostridium Difficile, you might know it as C. diff. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a deadly gut infection. And it's absolutely terrible. It causes bloody diarrhea, and then after a while, your gut, it ruptures, and then you die. So this is highly, highly fatal. And the thing with C. diff is that before, we hardly ever saw it. It was very, very rare, and now we're seeing it more and more and more. And C. diff is caused by antibiotic use, and it's a bacteria. So here we have something that is caused by antibiotic use, and our conventional treatment is to say, well, we need to give antibiotics. So we don't have a treatment for it, really, okay? It just kind of reinforces that negative cycle, and people are dying from this. So then you had a very bright, innovative scientist who was thinking out of the box and said, FMT, let's take the microbiota from a healthy individual and insert it into someone who has C. diff and see what happens. So that's what they did. Within 2 days, the person was cured. So that is now the protocol they use for treating C. diff. And because of this, they are now looking at, well, what else can we treat with this? So currently, there are so many studies going on looking at FMT for treating, yes, diabetes, but also things like, diabetes, heart disease, cancer. They're looking at autism, Alzheimer's, all sorts of different illnesses. So you're going to hear a lot about FMT going forward, and it's really, really exciting to see what the research comes out with. Basically, if you think about it, we have all these different illnesses, and we've named them, and we've categorized them. And what we're finding now is that actually everything comes back to this like 0 point, which is inflammation. So it doesn't matter where it manifests in the body, how it manifests, it is some form of inflammation, and that can be connected back to our microbiome, our ecosystem. Anyway, let's get back to fiber. So the gut microbiota, they love fiber, they eat fiber, and when we feed them with fiber, they reward us with the short-chain fatty acids. The problem is, of course, we don't eat enough fiber, okay? So when they've done studies in the West, they find that only 3% of people eat enough fiber. So in America, 97% of people are not eating enough fiber, and this is with a very low standard. So they're saying you should eat 25 grams of fiber if you're a woman, 38 grams of fiber if you are a man. And the average American eats 15 grams of fiber. Let's put that into perspective and go to northern Tanzania, where there is a tribe called the Hadza tribe. This is a hunter-gatherer tribe, the last of their kind, that have been living on that land for at least 10,000 years, something probably back as far as 50,000 years. And they've been living the same way during all that time. And at the moment, there are about 1,300 tribe members left, the Hadza tribe. Yes, they eat meat, but predominantly they eat plants. Now, they get 100 grams of fiber every day. Compared that to, like us, Westerners, 15 grams of fiber. So we're like way, way off. The thing is, fiber is not just fiber. There are millions of different types of fiber, probably billions. In fact, the chemistry is quite complicated that we don't even know, we have no means of accurately estimating how many different types of fibers there are. Every plant has its unique set of fibers, and each plant has multiple fibers, and all of these fibers are prebiotic. They feed the gut microbiome. So prebiotic basically means food for the probiotic, which is your gut microbiome, and they produce postbiotics, which are these chemicals such as the short-chain fatty acids. So you have prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic. The thing is that these microbes are picky eaters. So they have preferences for specific fibers. So for instance, if you eat green lentils, then certain bacteria love green lentils. And when you eat your green lentils, they're eating the fiber in those green lentils, and they're multiplying, and they're becoming stronger and giving you benefits. Then let's say you go on holiday or move country, and suddenly there are no green lentils. Then now these same bacteria will be starving because you're not feeding them their preferred food source. And they become weaker and weaker because they're not getting what they need. So different bacteria like different fibers. So the researchers then wanted to ask the question, can you change the human microbiome through what you eat? And this study was published in Nature, which is considered one of the most prestigious medical journals. This was back in January 2014. And they'd done this kind of studies on animals many, many times, but they'd never done it in humans. They'd never proved it in humans. And of course, we are a little bit more complex. So for this study, what they did was that they took extreme polar opposite diets. So they had a group of people, much like yourselves, and they took them first onto a 100% plant-based diet for 5 days. Then they gave them a little bit of a break, and then they put them all on a 100% animal-based diet, which was meat, dairy, eggs. So 2 polar extreme diets. And during that time, they measured the microbiome every day. What happened? The first thing was they realized that the microbiome changed on the very first day. So what they concluded from this is that our diet literally forms our microbiome. What you ate today for breakfast is already changing your microbiome. Then what they found is that when these people were on the plant-based diet for 5 days, you got the emergence of these anti-inflammatory microbes, these microbes that are particularly good at breaking down fiber and producing these short-chain fatty acids. When these people then went onto the 100% animal-based diet, they saw some disturbing changes. They saw the emergence of these, what they call bile-tolerable microbes, which are linked to inflammation and inflammatory bowel disease. So in just 5 days, you've not just changed your microbiome, you've actually laid the foundation for irritable bowel disease or inflammatory bowel disease. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get it in 5 days, but it does mean that you're setting yourself up for it to happen, right? Also, what they found was that they started seeing antibiotic-resistant microbes emerging in this microbiome. And you might ask, well, how? How is that possible? Well, it's because antibiotics are given to animals. And I was very surprised to learn that 80% of the antibiotics that are used in the world, 80% are given to animals. And, you know, you might think COVID is scary, but you know what's more scary? A world where antibiotics don't work. And the thing is that these antibiotics that are given to animals, it's not because the animals are sick. It's because studies show that if you give antibiotics to an animal, they're going to increase in weight. They're going to gain weight about 15%. Why? You're wiping out their microbiome. And just like in humans, if you disturb that microbiome, then you're going to start gaining weight. So, in just 5 days, we see these radical changes based just on your diet. How can we see such huge change in such a short period of time? Very simply, it's because these microbiomes, there's a new generation that emerges every 20 minutes. So in a one-day, 24-hour period, you have 50 new generations of microbes. So if we think of that in human evolution, that basically takes us back to the pyramids. And that's in 24 hours. That's why we see such a huge, huge change in such a short period of time. There was a very interesting study called the American Gut Project. And even though it's called American Gut Project, it's actually an international study with people from over 40 different countries participating. And this was the biggest study ever done connecting diet and lifestyle to the diversity of our microbiome. And the question they posed is this: what is the #1 predictor of a healthy microbiome? The #1 predictor of a healthy microbiome. And what they found through this extensive study was that it is the diversity of plants in your diet. Diversity of plants was more important than being vegan. Because you can be vegan, which means you're just eating plant foods, but you can be eating the same 10 to 15 plants every single day and not getting that diversity, and then hence not feeding and getting a wide diversity of microbiome. So it's not really about the label. It's not about the label, oh, I'm vegan or vegetarian or whatever. It's about the concept. So I'm going to take a little pause, and I'm going to ask you, for yourself, just think, how many plants do you eat in a typical week? Just think through. And when I say plants, yes, I mean vegetables, but I also mean lentils, beans, grains, nuts, seeds, things like garlic and onions and mint and whatever. Just think, how many plants do you think you eat in a typical week? Anyone want to venture? Yeah, Kasea? 5. Oh, I can tell you eat more than 5. Definitely eat more than 5 if you really think through it. Yeah, it includes fruits, anything from the plant kingdom, 100%. So the American Gut Project, what they found was that if you want a healthy, diverse microbiome, you need to eat about 30 plants, different plants every week. Okay, 30. More is better, diversity. But remember, it's not just vegetables, it's everything from the plant kingdom, okay? So even if you drink that immunoboost, you're getting moringa, baobab, ginger, turmeric, and so on, yeah? So I know it sounds a lot, but more is better, more diversity. If we go back to the Hadza tribe, that hunter-gatherer tribe in northern Tanzania, what the researchers found is that they eat 600 different plants in a year. 600 different plants. And is there any wonder then that they have 10 times the diversity of their microbiome compared to us? 10 times. Biodiversity of your gut microbiome is a direct measure of your health. So the more diverse your microbiome, the healthier you are, and the more resistant you will be to disturbances. And it's what I said earlier, because all these microbes have different purposes, so if you have a diversity and you lose one, someone else can step in and fill that function. So that's why diversity is so, so important. Okay, I'm going to take you back to the Hadza one more time, and I'm going to tell you a fascinating little story. So, the Hadza, they have been researched by many researchers because, of course, they're the last hunter-gatherers in the world. So we want to find out what they're eating, what is their microbiome like, and all sorts. So there were researchers there for Harvard University, probably from other universities as well. Then one day, there was a group of missionaries who rocked up, and they had brought boxes and boxes of antibiotics. And they said to the Hadza, if you ever get ill, just take these antibiotics. Now, the Hadza, they didn't really, well, maybe I should say, the Harvard researchers who were there, they were mandated that they were just there to observe. They could not intervene with any decisions that the tribe made. So they could not say, no, 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 please don't do that. They couldn't do that. But they were so concerned that they called their research coordinators back in the US and said, you know, we feel we have an ethical, moral obligation to intervene here and say, please don't take these antibiotics. But they were told, no, you are there just to observe. And the Hadza, they didn't know what antibiotics were. They have never heard the word before. And they don't really have such a strong concept of sickness like we do because they don't get chronic illnesses. So what happened was that night around the fire, they ate all the boxes of antibiotics in one sitting. Yeah? And you can imagine the few researchers who were on the ground were literally weeping because here you have the Hadza with this beautiful example of what the human gut microbiome can be, 10 times more than what we see in us, yeah? And now they have just eaten boxes upon boxes of antibiotics. They were devastated. But they had been there for many years doing this research, and they continued doing their research, and the next morning they went out and they collected the stool samples, they sent them back to the university, and it took about a month before they got all the data back. So, what happened? After the most massive antibiotic exposure ever to man, they found that there was zero change in the Hadza's gut microbiome. Did not collapse. They were 100% resilient. The researchers were amazed. How is this possible? And the conclusion was this. These people are in such continuous communication and relationship with the greater ecosystem that the gut represents just a tiny facet. So you can wipe out the gut flora within minutes. It will start repopulating because they breathe outside, they're getting that microbiome. They work outside, they don't wear shoes, they're in contact with the soil, touching the soil. There are animals, they touch the animals, they touch each other, they're reinforcing each other's microbiome. They're completely exposed all the time. 100% resilient. Let's contrast this. They did a study in September 2018. It was published in the journal Cell. And this is now with normal people like us. This is in the US. They gave people antibiotics for 2 weeks, and then they measured what happened to the microbiome, and what they found was that there was, on average, 80% destruction of the microbiome from 2 weeks of antibiotics. This was obviously much, much lower dose than what the Hadza had been exposed to. What's the difference? The difference is our modern lives. We are completely disconnected from this greater microbiome. We live indoors. We tend to work indoors with ventilation systems and all sorts. We wear shoes. We're disconnected from the earth. We buy our food in supermarkets where it's covered in plastics and traveled, thousands of miles to get to us. If you go out in a garden and you rip out like some carrots, then there are like millions of microbes that would just come up from the soil. And also when you pick something fresh off the vine, like a tomato, there are microbes in that, and they just start disappearing just within minutes, right? But if you eat that there and then, you're getting all those microbes. But we're disconnected from that. Our food supply, completely contaminated with pesticides and herbicides. And like I mentioned, that herbicide's antibiotic. It's killing the microbes. And then our cleaning materials. We are completely obsessed with cleaning and sterilizing everything. Our skincare chemicals that we put on our bodies, killing the microbiome. And now, social distancing. We're no longer giving each other hugs. Because when we give each other hugs, hold on tight, guys, because you're sharing your microbiome. You're strengthening your microbiome. And then we wear masks. And of course, then we're just breathing in and reinforcing our very limited microbiome. We're not exposing ourselves as much. So that is why something like antibiotics would have such a devastating effect on us compared to someone like the Hadza tribe living off the land. So let's recap. The microbiome is critical to your health. Immune function, brain function, digestion, whether you get chronic illnesses, absolutely essential. The best predictor of health is a diverse microbiome. They thrive on fiber, so you have to eat a lot of fiber, but they are picky eaters. Hence, to support a diverse, healthy microbiome, you have to eat a diversity of the plants. So if there's only one thing that you remember from this talk, take that with you, and that is diversity is key. Now, a lot of people have problems with their digestion, and you hear a lot of people say, oh, I can't eat a lot of plant foods, especially raw vegetables. There's so much fiber. They get gas, bloating, cramps. And often these people then will just cut out these fibrous plant foods. So science is telling us if we want to be healthy, we need that diverse microbiome, and hence we need to eat lots of fibrous vegetables, plant foods. So if that's the case, why do people feel better if they're suffering from gas and bloating when they eliminate these plant foods, these fibrous foods? Well, the reason is because they have a damaged gut. And a damaged gut will always result in food sensitivities. Because if you do not have the bacteria to break down the fiber, then you are going to get unpleasant digestive symptoms. It's just the way it is. And let's look at this in a little bit more detail. Humans have only 17 enzymes that can break down fiber. 17. A healthy microbiome has 60,000 enzymes that they can make to break down fiber. So a little bacteria that you can't even see has the capacity to produce 100 different enzymes to break down fiber. And you thought you were so cool. You can only do 17. Yeah? That's why also there's no fiber digestion early on in the digestive tract, because that's where we rely on our own digestive enzymes. So it goes through esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, but it's only when it gets to the large intestine, the colon, where the microbes with all their enzymes can start breaking down that fiber. So if you are missing these microbes and their enzymes to break down the fiber, then you are going to get symptoms. But the solution is not to just cut out these vegetables, these fibrous vegetables, because although you might feel better in the short term, in the long term, you are harming your health because your diversity of microbes will go down. Okay? And remember, diversity of the microbiome is the best predictor of health. So, what do you do Well, it turns out that your gut is trainable. It can adapt. And you can start training your gut immediately, and it will start changing within 24 hours. But it's not just going to happen on its own. You got to put a little bit of effort in it. You can think of it as a muscle. So if you haven't been training physically, you're not going to go into the gym and suddenly decide to lift 200 kilos, right? You're going to hurt yourself. And it's kind of the same with your gut. If you haven't been eating beans, for instance, and you go and have a big bowl of a 5-bean salad, yeah, it's going to hurt. You're going to get digestive problems. You're going to get that gas and bloating. So the solution is you go slow, small quantities, and slowly you build up that capacity of your gut, the microbes that can then produce those enzymes to break down the fiber. And after a while, you will not get those digestive symptoms. Remember, if you just take the foods away, then the microbes who feed on them will grow weak and starve, and hence weaken your microbiome and your health. So the solution is not just to eliminate them. As a final thought, I just want to look at cravings, because I find this absolutely fascinating. Turns out your cravings are connected to your microbiome. Because if you've been eating in a certain way for a period of time, then of course you've been feeding a certain type of bacteria, a certain set of bacteria, whether good or bad, right? And these bacteria, they don't want to die, so they're going to give you signals of the type of food they want to survive, and those signals are your cravings. So if you change your microbiome, you literally change your cravings. Takes a little bit of time, but you can do it. Okay? Right, guys, so I really hope I've opened your eyes to this incredible world of the microbiome and all the organisms that live around us and are part of us, and given you some appreciation for these guys. The thing is that we cannot think of ourselves in isolation, because our microbiome, it's like a microcosm of the bigger macrocosm of the microbiome of Mother Nature, with all her 10 to the 31 microbes in our soil and our air and our water supply. And if we destroy that greater microbiome, which is what we're doing very, very rapidly, it is reflected in our microcosm in our body, okay? So you can no longer think of your health just as, okay, this is my responsibility. Your responsibility for your health actually extends into Mother Nature, this greater macrocosm. But that's for another day. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Thank you so, so much. I will open up to some questions. Is there any questions? Yeah? Yeah?
If you then try to introduce more diversity in your digestive system, it is very important that you keep feeding them. Otherwise, you will lose them again as well. So if you eat your fermented food, or you drink your kefir, or you do those things to add in your system, you still need to change your actual diet from what it was to then, from that moment on, have more diversity in your food, so that you will keep those new ones, if you like, settling in your digestive system.
100%. And that's also why sometimes, you know, we eat a certain way and then we go on holiday, and when you come back, it's like, oh, I can't wait to eat my normal diet again. And it's because you've been starving those bacteria, and they're so happy to be back home for you to start eating your normal diet again. They're quite resilient, but yes, absolutely. If you don't continue eating those foods, they will become weaker and weaker and weaker. So you have to continue with that diversity, 100%.
Good. Thanks for coming, guys. And next time, tell your friends to come. This is such important information. We need more people to attend these things. But for you who did come, thank you very much. I'm very, very grateful. Okay. Take care.